to the Redeemed Man podcast. Today is truly a celebration. Today is our 100th podcast, and so thankful because Nate Dewberry, our director, coming on has made all the difference in the world in our ability to transform from a monthly to a weekly podcast, which has, of course, gotten us along the journey much faster. This started in the spring, late spring of 2020 with our first podcast and doing that every month. And now here we are. And so we're so thankful, Nate, to you and to what's happened. And today, let's spend some time talking about our ministry and what's happened and what's gone on with this incredible podcast and what we may be doing from here.
Paul, I am ecstatic. I cannot believe that we are already here at the 100th episode. It has been so much fun interviewing guests, hearing stories, hearing some from our audience who are sharing about stories about impact that they've received from listening to different episodes. How did it start? You mentioned going back to when we started the podcast, but where did that vision, that idea come from, and how did it get going?
Well, I think this is something that most people in our audience can really relate to, in that COVID changed and transformed all of our lives. Yeah. In the early spring of 2020, after a planning period in 2019, we were going to launch with really the primary focus on small groups and on interaction here locally in the Columbus area. Unfortunately, we had that plan to launch the same month that COVID hit. And I'll tell you, I have to be honest, there was a moment of real crisis of whether or not this is what God wanted and whether or not this was the right thing for us to do. And, you know, I just prayed and asked God if this is what he wanted to make it easy from here. Something I've consistently prayed about in other aspects of my life as well. And through a great group of people, Pink Pebble Marketing, and some others who were helping at the time, we were able to transform and shift from a local in-person ministry to a national brand ministry where we really went with a podcast, social media, and connection with people when people weren't connecting, when people were disparate from each other. And so we started filming episodes in the summer of 2020, or really this late spring of 2020. And it was slow going at first. We had some fabulous guests, but the truth is getting the message out and getting people to follow a new podcast is difficult because it just takes some time to share your brand. So I believe that we started out really with focusing on heavily theological, heavily biblical, and good stories from people. And over time, we've really evolved. Yeah. We've gotten into many more ministries. We've gotten into people who have been through life's difficulties and triumphed over those, just like we talk about the mission of what we do really is focused on. And we've really helped take our mission of getting people into community and transforming their lives into something that has become real and present in our show. And so tell me about your experience. Tell me about, you and I talk so much that I don't know that I often ask you the questions of the most basic. So I'm going to ask you the most basic question, which is, what has your experience been like being a part of this podcast, and how have you felt it evolve over time?
Yeah. Well, first off, it was very intimidating to start out with a podcast, partly because so much of the communication I'd done previously was one way.
Oh, yeah.
An interview is so different. And when you're communicating or teaching, you're literally sharing with an audience. I was very used to that, and going into an environment where you're trying to prepare and listen to what someone is saying, but then work on the questions in your mind.
Yeah.
You're always in conversation. You want to make sure you're listening to somebody. And so the hard part about it is to make sure you're listening, but then to also have these questions developed in your head so you have some resources to pull from. And my favorite ones are the ones that I feel like are very organic back and forth conversation.
Yeah, sure.
But that's a two-way situation, because you've got to have the guest who's familiar and comfortable with that as well. And oftentimes I think one of the challenges in the environment that we're in is to help a guest feel at ease and to feel like they're just talking to a friend.
Yeah, of
And
course.
that is not always easy to do, depending on personalities, backgrounds, and that's something I'm continually learning. Or how do we help a guest feel like they've known you for a while? Because there is something to be said about just feeling like you're listening in on conversation. Those are some of my favorite podcasts when it is a story-oriented transformation type podcast. Is you feel like you're eavesdropping on a conversation.
Yeah.
There are other podcasts out there that are just informational, and they're giving you information, but that's very different than I think what we have developed here in hearing people's stories and trying to pull out things from their life. And that's been fun because there's always something in every episode that I learn about the people that we're interviewing. Yeah. I mean, even if they're, I have studied and researched, there's always something that comes out about something they enjoy, something that's impacted them from their life. And for me, one of the things that's so important about who we are as the Redeemed is we're relational. We're about people, and we're about how people really make us better. Mm-hmm. They refine us, and we believe that Christian community is essential to our health. And so it's been so much fun developing more relationships with people all across our country as we've reached out to more and more guests, and then the diversity of guests from older guys to younger men to, one of the guests I just interviewed yesterday for a podcast that's dropping, 75 tattoos, a very pronounced mustache to we might have a business guy sitting here in his tie from work. And those two, it's been fun to see the difference in them. But the commonalities, one of the things that I consistently see is just that story about how people have made them who they are.
Yeah.
People have impacted their lives. People have been there in the tough times. People have walked with them in the good times, and how much the relationships around them make those men who they are. And that is a lot of fun for me to watch.
That is awesome. Just listening to you and seeing the smile on your face and watching you light up, that fear obviously slipped away very quickly. And you have gotten to a place of extreme comfort. I enjoy listening to your interviews, and I think you do a fabulous job. So thank you for helping take this on and do this. I will tell you that for me, one of the big elements of change in this has been the willingness to share my own story through questions and through answers and through combined conversation. When I first started doing the podcast, I think I was half petrified to not only talk, but to share anything about myself. Yeah. And if there's been any real evolution for me over the last 4 years, hard to believe it's been 4 years, but crazy. 4 years is the fact that I feel much more comfortable now sharing about myself, sharing about my difficulties and the struggle that I've been through in life, sharing about, how difficult this journey was, but also is. The fact of the matter is, and one of the things that I'm really dealing with and grappling with right now is that this journey is never complete. And this journey is one that, as we interview people and as we get to know people on this podcast and as we hear their wonderful stories, we all know that we are all works and works that are being worked on all the time. And God is blessing us in our lives and continuing to develop us and grow us. And the older I get, the more I realize I don't know. And
isn't that true?
It is absolutely true. I think I knew it all at 20, and now I don't know anything at 48. And so, but I've enjoyed beginning to relate to people through the podcast. And while we don't necessarily get direct feedback, the indirect feedback we get has been tremendous. And so I have loved the way people have reached out or talked to us, just as you mentioned, about what they love, what they enjoy, what has had impact on their lives, and then coming back and trying to then develop and get people on board with the podcast that even further those things that went well. And so to our audience, I'd say this to you in this moment. We always are listening, and we're always open to your feedback, and we want you to continue to help us know what are the places that we can dive deeper, what are the places that we can have guests that would be meaningful, and what are the places where ultimately are going to have an impact in your life the way that this is having an impact in ours.
I couldn't agree more, Paul. And I think there's two things I really want to draw out from what you shared. And one is sharing your story. And I think that's a perfect picture, though, of what we really hope for men that connect in the ministry is that it is a journey. And that if you don't feel like you're ready to share your story to everybody, that it's a journey, that you don't have to, that you get to come into a space and begin to share parts of your story. And as you get comfortable, you get to share more of your story.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that I think is so important about the groups that we offer is that safe space for guys to be able to go, hey, this is how much I can share today. And then maybe the next meeting they share a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then maybe a few months. And then maybe a few years go by where they feel like they have the complete freedom to share that, and it brings up total different emotions than it did the first time they shared. Because I don't know if you're probably like me, the first few times you share your story, there's shame that comes back sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
There's fear of how are people going to react to this. But the more you're able to share that and the more you see that people go, oh, I get it. I've been there too. The more you're able to share that story and have peace and going, man, God has done so much in my life. I'm not where I was before. I'm different than I was. And so if you have been listening and you have a story about the transformation in your life, we want to hear that. Like on our website, we have opportunities for you to share by video or through a text or written format. We want to hear stories because there's often times where, we know that there's transformation, but we don't get to share that. And your story, my story is something that people can relate to. Even if not fully, it's, hey, we were broken. We have been a mess. And yet God is in the process of bringing wholeness and restoration and transformation. And it's awesome to get to do that with other men who are along the journey. Guys who can encourage us and go, man, I've been there. I relate to what you're going through. And guys who say, hey, look, do you remember where you were here? You're not like that anymore.
Yeah.
Think about what God's done in your life. I mean, it's so much fun. The other part of that is you mentioned hearing from our audience and those people who are listening. One of the things I've enjoyed doing is reading some of our reviews on the Apple podcast. And if you have never left us a review and you're enjoying the show, we would love to have you leave us a review. But one of my favorite ones is from Noel, and Noel's in one of our small groups, has been in several of our small groups, but he shares this about the podcast. He says, in a world filled with negativity, brokenness, uncertainty, and confusion, it's great to hear from men who are transparent, spirit-filled, and led, and an encouragement to others. As men, we're taught to tough it out or don't speak about our problems, but this podcast is a channel for men to do the opposite. Iron sharpens iron. The hosts, guests, and questions are top tier. Give these guys a listen. You won't regret it. And humility in that. Like Paul and I feel very unqualified for that. But it has been such an honor to hear from you, our audience, about what God's doing in your life and how it's been an encouragement to you. And I've watched Noel be changed and transformed. He's plugged into our community, and in Huntsville, Alabama, I have a guy who just recently, he listens to our podcast, but he's taken the journey to get plugged into online groups. And man, it's been so much fun to see him take that step, because he was like, I don't know about the online thing. Like, I've always done in person, and that sounds a little bit, but he's found it convenient for his schedule where he's able to connect with other guys. He's able to support his wife and not be away from home that night if there's an emergency. And he is loving it, even now talking about how he can lead a group himself. And really, that's how we hope the podcast is, that it's a catalyst, that it's not, hey, we're just listening to this, but you're plugging into our community to a greater way. Please leave us a rating. Please leave us a review. It's always helpful in the podcast world. It is a little bit about getting your name out there so others are awareness. And so that helps us with podcasts, with the rating and reviews, to have other people aware of us. But then don't hesitate. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening somewhere, send us an email, leave us a comment. Let us know what you're enjoying, what you would like to see, because we really do want to do some things that our audience wants to hear. It's not just about Paul and I talking.
That's for sure. I do not come to these podcasts and say to myself, they want to hear Paul.
Yeah.
I know that they want to hear our guests, and And we've been blessed with so many wonderful people, so many people who've given up time out of their busy schedules to come and to talk with us and to really invest deeply. And, I get it. For some people, the podcast is the perfect distance for them. It doesn't necessarily thrust into community and into an opportunity to really be with other people because that may not be where they are yet. But I will tell you that for our audience, I hope that you will listen and gain the courage to step into community. I think that is the hope of this podcast, is that to see so many different people from so many different walks of life who many of them, their story isn't perfect. They haven't lived the perfect life. I certainly have not. I had a lot of shame about my story but thankfulness for the transformation that God's brought to my life. And the whole concept of the redeemed man is the fact that God has stepped before us, redeemed us, and given us the opportunity to be someone different going forward. And while those are big shoes to fill, and it may not always be easy, it's one that we strongly encourage you to do. And I would tell you that for our men who are hesitant, there are people out there who believe in diving in deeply early. I try to be in a small group, especially one that's not on the radio. I try to be somebody who dives in quickly. I try to be somebody who tells my story early on so that other people feel the safety and the desire to step forward and to hear. Because I figure if they hear my story, they can say to themselves, it can't be as bad as him, and so they're going to step forward and do that. And I think that's the beauty of community is it opening up and helping each other begin to feel the comfort, the safety, and the ability to be seen by other people. Whether it's seen physically or seen through the lens of a computer screen, I think that the one thing that COVID did for us on the positive is it made the word Zoom a common word in our language. It made the ability to use teleconferencing something that was not only for business, but it was for personal interaction. I mean, I understand that young people now are dating via Zoom, which I find to be even a step further than our small groups. But for us, this is a chance to really get real with people over technology or in person. But I think that it's asserting its way, and that's part of what this podcast does. Is it allows to utilize technology to bring to the heart of people and to their ears some story that will inspire them to get to a deeper place and into community is our hope.
Could not agree more. I love to hear those stories of transformation of the guests that come on the show. And I think it is our hope that spurs people to take that step, because almost every single person that's walked through something difficult has had that moment where they've went, I had to share it with somebody. I had to find some people to gather around me to help me walk through and unpackage everything that I was walking through. And I'll attest that you do take that first step. The first time I sat down with you at a restaurant, you shared your story right off the bat with a vulnerability that really caught me off guard, because I was not expecting that, and really disarmed me from not being willing to share my own story, and allowed me to open up because you went first. And I think that is such an honor that you did that on that day. But that's really what our groups are about, is having those guys be able to step into that space to go, hey, this is where I am. It's not where I want to be, but this is where I am, and take steps of healing.
Well, I just have to say really quickly, it was a former podcast guest that called me one day and said, God told me to take you to lunch. Mm-hmm. And we went to lunch, a very casual restaurant, and he looked at me and he basically wanted me to tell my story. And I looked back at him and I was like, I am not about to tell you my story out of nowhere. I don't know you. I don't know anything about you, and I don't know that I can trust you.
Yeah.
And he shared his story with me immediately when he saw the fear in my eyes. And when he got done telling his story, I was like, if he can tell his story, I can tell my story. So I have ever since then used that as motivation and inspiration to be the one to share and share first. And I think that I'm so thankful, because if somebody hadn't done it for me, I wouldn't be able to do it for other people.
No, that's great. Beautiful testimony there, and we thank that guy for taking that step.
I do too.
Call,
all the time.
One of the things too about our groups, a lot of people think about the online and think about I'm just meeting with these guys once a week. We really do seek to form community in those groups, and so the leaders, the co-leaders are often reaching out, having one-on-one conversations. There's texts, there's phone calls. We want those guys to do life together, even though they may be in total different countries or states, but we can still encourage each other remotely. And that's been one of the fun things to see these guys step into these groups and have an experience that's not just a once a week meeting, but it's a journey and continually reaching out and touches. We have one of our groups that's on WhatsApp, and their group messages are always firing off, just encouraging each other, sharing the struggles. We want people to reach out and not act out on whatever struggle they have or whatever challenges in their life. We want to have a community to reach out to, and that's what we're seeking to build with the online groups. We do believe that it's great for people to be in person, but all the time there's not an option for that, especially men who have maybe busy schedules with their jobs and their responsibilities with their kids and family. Like, it can be hard to find a group. And so our goal is to be able to have groups that are really convenient for guys, that they can plug in and still take their kids to the ball field that night and spend that quality time with them and get some moments with their wife, and then jump on a group to find that encouragement and to be able to kind of basically unpackage what happened during that day or the challenges they faced as being a dad or being a husband. And it is so much fun to watch the transformation in some of these guys. We have one young man who just got in a group recently from University of Colorado, and this guy is on fire. But the reality of it is he still has challenges from some of the things that have happened to him, some of the things that he's done in his own life. And he's able to find that community and group of guys that encourage him, that support him, that send him texts, that let him know they're praying for him. He even reached out just this week, letting me know he's going through a challenging time and just, hey, can you pray for me? And we'll meet the end of this week just to talk through what God's doing in his life. And those stories of transformation are what it's all about. We have another guy who has struggled with pornography, and he's jumped into a group and now is several months free from that, is walking with guys who encourage him, who, if he is struggling, he has some guys to text and reach out to and say, hey man, I need you. Can you help check on me? And watching the freedom that he now has, the joy that he has in his life, that is what it's all about. That's why we highlight the stories of transformation. That's why we have guys on the podcast that talk about the journey that they've taken, so that, again, hopefully men will take that step to plug into community and relationships, because it is essential for our healing.
Wow. Those are two great stories, and I love hearing about the conversations that are happening and the relationships that are forming and the community that's building in our small groups. Nate, as I step back and I think about this podcast, I am so inspired for the future, but let's reflect for a few moments on the past. And I have to start with, my favorite podcast, without a doubt, is the one I spent with my own family and my own son in Mansell. I've talked about this several times on this podcast, but, there are just moments in life that are clairvoyant, that are important, that are critical to kind of where you are in your future. And, for Mansell and I to both look at our history and to talk about what it means for our future, that was a special podcast for me, and one that I will forever remember. And thankfully, we've gotten some very good feedback on it. People, you never know when you're going to talk to your own family whether people will find that to be interesting, and so they did. And I think Mansell is such a genuine and wonderful young man with a heart for God and an excitement. And he just got through preaching another great sermon this week. And so I think that, people can hear him and see him and be inspired by his story and his willingness to be, forgiven, to forgive me of the things that I've done wrong in life, and to have it grow a relationship between the two of us. But, well, before we go any further, what would be one of your favorite episodes?
First off, Paul, I have to say that episode with you and Mansell was great. And one of the things that I just want to honor you because I've watched you as a dad and how you love your kids, and people may see that with just Mansell, but that's the way you are with all your children, and how you love them and really seek to be present in their life and have a great relationship with them. And so thank you for taking that moment to share a little picture with your journey with Mansell. And we look forward to other opportunities to have glimpses into your life. But thank you for letting us as an audience, as people to kind of to be able to peek in to see the transformation that's taken place. For me,
thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, it's an honor. For me, the episodes that I think about, honestly, are some of these. You know, we've done a few back and forth like this.
Mm-hmm.
We have had some where we've had another guest, but it's always fun for me just to spend time with you and have conversation. You make me a better person. There are things about your life that, man, there's times that when Matthew and I go, what did that word he said mean? You know, you have a great vocabulary, a very, very robust vocabulary. And I'm like, I love that. You are thoughtful and strategic in so many ways, and gifted in areas that are not my strong suit. I mean, your ability to understand business and numbers and strategy. And for me, I love the part that I get to do in the relationships and caring for people, and how do we keep it focused on Christ and build biblical community. And it's been fun to be able to do that together. Some of our favorite moments are that where we get to do the podcast. And then I enjoyed when we had the couples on. For me, some of those interviews where my wife and I did a few of those. I did a few of those where we had couples on in the months of February, both this year and last year. Those were a lot of fun, partly because there's something different and fresh, and giving us some different perspective. And again, as an audience, that helps us anytime you let us know what you like and what you enjoy, because we are willing to try some different things. We're even now really being strategic and figuring out what are our next steps as a podcast. Where do we go from here? Because we want to create quality content that really does help, you know, our listeners. It's not just about, oh, we did 100 episodes. Great. What we want to offer things that really help you guys. So please let us know what you're enjoying. One of the episodes that's the most viewed on YouTube is Jonathan Carstory and Scott Donahoe. And these guys are volunteering with FCA, and hearing their stories about how they're impacting young men and young women. That's been one of our most viewed. And honestly, was not one that I would have expected to be the most viewed. Great people, not to limit them and their stories, but it was not one that I expected to be up there as one of our top views. And yet God sometimes has a way to use the unexpected to reach people and touch people.
I agree. That interview was amazing. And their stories individually and collectively are very powerful.
Yes.
There's a whole lot of God saving and fixing and doing the things. But yet, you know, we've had people who have had national, name recognition. And I love the fact that our audience sometimes really veers toward the real stories, the people who haven't had the perfect life, some of the broken, some of the restored, and what we've seen as an audience, because I'm just blown away sometimes by the episodes that are chosen. But I'm so thankful that we have a variety of different ones that allow for people to be inspired in different ways.
No, it's been so much fun, the diversity of guests, and we're continuing to reach out to different people. A little bit of the behind the scenes of kind of what it looks like. We are consistently sending Instagram messages, emailing people, reaching out to people that we feel like have a powerful story that would be a great fit for our show. And we're doing that all the time. And then once you kind of get a conversation going, then you're trying to schedule a date for recording. We record at different times in studio. We try to get people here if they can, but if they can't, we record remotely through software called Riverside.fm that we use that helps us be able to interview people that aren't local. Matthew, some of you guys have seen on some of our podcasts, Matthew Sanchez does our in-house video, and we have our studio here at our office space, and we utilize that. And it's been fun because we didn't have this space when we started. We've been able to build this studio space, which has been a lot of fun to have our own room that we can use for our podcast recordings. And it's really come a long ways from where we were. And sometimes I think it's easy to take for granted all the steps that we've taken along the way. Once we get a guest here and they interview with us, then there's the follow-up and letting them know our appreciation, staying in contact with them. But it is takes a team to make it happen. We're thankful for those who do our video editing and make sure it's uploaded to Buzzsprout and all that happens to disseminate the podcast to the right platforms, to change it out on our website. There's so much that goes into each week that podcast going live that sometimes we can take for granted, but we are so thankful for the team that makes it happen each week.
Yeah, I want to pull one word out of what you just said, because you said so many wonderful things, but I think our audience needs to know the word build. This badass studio that we are sitting in was not just built by somebody. It was built by Nate and his father. And for me to envision something like this and then to have it come to reality is something that's not in my skill set. It is just, I could never have done this in all of my days. And yet we have had the most amazing conversations because of the warmth and the comfort and the beauty of a space that is allocated for these types of things. And I think it really enhances people's comfort. I think it enhances their willingness to open up. And so I'm so thankful to you for building out this studio and having it be something that we have a place to go and is designated for just these types of conversations.
Well, it's one of those things when you grow up in rural Alabama, you learn to do a lot of things. And there's times where people, even when I share, I enjoy hunting, they're like, I wouldn't expect that. I'm like, when you grow up in Alabama, there's a lot of things you learn to do and learn to enjoy. And one of those is building, because you have to rely on yourself sometimes to make things happen. And I'm thankful for Dad, who helps me with so many different projects at my home and has been a great teacher. One of the things, though, Paul, I would love for us to share is we've talked about some serious things here. Has there been any funny moments, like something that happened behind the scenes or a conversation that surprised you? For me, I think about Matthew when we're in here videoing at times. People don't see, the behind the scenes, but sometimes Matthew gets hungry. And he goes to the granola bars early and he is eating while I'm trying to talk or interview somebody. And I'm like, what is he doing? There's a rat over there in the corner. Those are moments that I'm like, people don't get to experience that, but that's something that's happening behind the scenes that I'm like, if they only knew what was going on right now.
I would have to say that I have a lot of fun with this. I think that getting to interview people is such an honor. Yeah. And getting to pull out their stories. I think of Greg Countryman, who is our sheriff and marshal here in Columbus, Georgia. And he has such an incredible story of overcoming and success and love and family, and just getting the opportunity to pull that out and to do that. That is fun to me. Because of the depth of some of these conversations, they aren't always funny, but they are fun. And I think that's something that's there. I think the only thing that I find that's funny sometimes is me, and in the sense that I make a lot of mistakes and I make a lot of errors and I fumble my words and I do different things and I just try my best to show up for the people, to pray ahead of time, to make my words the words that God wants, not the words that I want. And I have a lot of fun feeling that kind of spirit-led situation and spirit-led, verbiage come out. And so that's what's most fun for me.
Well, Paul, you're a collaborator through and through, so I definitely know you enjoy the back and forth and the conversation and unpackaging people's stories. So thank you for being such a good interviewer. Paul, thank you so much for doing this podcast with me. It's amazing that we're on our 100th episode, and we're excited about what God has in store and what's ahead. It has been a joy ride so far, and I believe the best is yet to come.
I couldn't agree more. And to our audience, I just got to say to you, the only reason we're at 100 episodes is because of you. Yes. And we are so thankful for your listenership, your viewership, coming and saying and seeing that this is important, is something that we directly are motivated by, inspired by, and do it because of. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for your time. God bless and Godspeed.
Thank you. And we are so appreciative to what you do for listening in. As Paul said, God bless, and the best is yet to come.